Hi, my name is Christopher Lefholtz. I am Senior Director of Development here at GitLab, and I am with Sid Brandy, our CEO, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be iterative. Thanks for taking time, Sid. I really appreciate you being able to spend some time with me on this topic.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this.
Sure thing. Let's start with what does it mean to be iterative? I'd love to hear in your own words what it means.
It means scoping down a task to deliver it sooner. So it means making something smaller so you can get it done quicker.
That's really cool. What do you think is the largest benefits for this kind of mentality?
I think it helps with coordination and feedback. So in a company, especially if it's getting larger, one of the hardest things is coordinating with the other people in the company and getting feedback from the customers. If you ship something, it's much easier for everyone to kind of understand what you're doing and to respond to it. So if I have a project and I'm planning 9 months out, everyone has to spend a lot of time thinking about that. There's going to be a lot of back and forth. The plan is going to change substantially as people give feedback. It's super hard to know whether you even want to end up, whether you even can end up there. And then I'm not going to have any feedback for 9 months. Instead, if I take a step that's only a week long, my colleagues won't even care what I do because it's going to be such a small step. They will see it and they can say something then or later. And I'm going to get feedback from users. The hard thing is, like, if you have a lot of sign-offs and other considerations, you do have to ship. So like you do have to ship it in a month and they do another month and do another month. So you got to reduce the cycle time, the time it takes you between deciding to do it and getting it out there. And if you can reduce that, you can take smaller steps.
Very cool. One of the things I would love to do is walk you through an example of where we thought we were iterative and kind of get your thoughts on it. I feel like that's a good way to kind of show our viewers that thought process. Are you up for that?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here really quick. This is an example, and I'll try to give you a high-level overview of this. This is an example where we were actually, we have basically an error detail page in our ops section, in our ops monitor section, I should say, where we essentially are looking at errors associated with this part of the product called Sentry. One of the things that would be great to do is be able to create an issue based off the error that you see. And there's a description here where we talk about the problem we're trying to solve, the intended users associated with this and further details. In particular, what I want to talk a little bit about is kind of the general idea here of the design associated with this. So as an example, the idea here is to obviously create an issue, populate with information associated with it as part of this overall epic. Now, one of the things that the team decided to do as a first step is just simply create a button to go create an issue. So in this particular example, the button is just creating the issue and it's not populating with any information, which is actually a fairly trivial thing. Does that seem like a good first step?
It seems like a great first step.
Yeah, and it's important to note here that there are no back-end work to be done with this. So this is a good example of giving the customer an opportunity to see it up front. So what might be the next thing we might look at to do as a step? Well, the next step, which actually started just 3 days later, was just pass the information, and it's unstyled. In this particular case, it's the error title, description, and link. So it'll come in kind of as raw data, as opposed to being in a stylized form associated with it. So
that's a great step, and I think you can populate our issues from the URL. So this is pretty easy to make in that regard. An even smaller step would be to put a button next to it, the create issue, and say copy information to clipboard. Then you press the create issue, and you have to paste the information in yourself. That way we could still, I suppose this would need backend work. You could still do it without any backend work. Now, I think I know that because of the technical solution, you can just embed it in the URL. So that wasn't needed in this case, but that will be a way to make it even smaller.
That's a good observation that sometimes when we're moving information in the tool, if we're not ready to build a table or different things, asking the customer to copy to a clipboard and then paste it in is a great way to kind of move information. So that's a great mechanism that we need to be thinking about leveraging, particularly when we're thinking incremental. Okay, so we've gotten to that point. Next thing is actually passing the actual information in a stylized form. This actually didn't happen too much later. It was basically the work started about a day later. Just to give an idea of perspective of here, we started this work on November 18th. That was the first step. Step 2 was started on the 22nd, and the third step was started on the 23rd, where we actually passed stylized information.
This is crazy good. Awesome.
So the last part I'll actually do is talk a little bit about the back end, which is on the 23rd, let's see, yes, sorry, lost my notes. So on the 22nd, we actually started the back end, which is actually to create a table to match up with the issues that we're creating based on this, so we can have some reference around this to basically search associated with this. So it even started a little bit later from that perspective. And just creating the table took a few more days. It was from the 22nd through the 9th, but you know, a good example of now we're actually populating data that can be referenced to make it more efficient. Awesome. Does that make sense? Or do you think there's something else we should have thought of?
No, this seems like the minimal step. This is great.
Cool. So there are further steps associated with this, and if people are interested, I believe this is issue or Epic 2210, which I'll include in the notes associated with this and the notes afterwards for the recording. But it's a really good example of some follow-on work here. One of my observations, really, and it was a good exercise for me to kind of work through, was the aspect of being able to start front-end work even before back-end work actually even is done. Obviously, we're not an API-first company, and companies that work in that fashion would obviously think in terms of, okay, what's the database going to look like? Those kinds of things associated with it. Do you think we talk about this much, or are there other aspects, observations that you think we should kind of highlight here that help in this regard?
I think what I would add is that I love front end first. I love interface first, also because it helps everyone think about it. Like if you have something in the interface, it's easier to understand for customers, for backend people, etc. So in the end, what the customer sees is the product. Like one way to develop is start with the README or start with the press release. I think after that, the closest thing you can think of is the interface. So I think it's much better to have an interface built and then do the backend, and vice versa, even though I come from backend engineering.
Yeah, and for the companies I've worked at, it's definitely counterintuitive for me. So it's one of those cases where I've had to unlearn a little bit of, what does the API look like first before thinking about it from a front end perspective. So I think it's a great thing for our folks to kind of be thinking about as they are on this journey with us. Cool. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a slightly more difficult one. I don't have broken down quite as crisply, but I'd be curious to also walk through one that I'll start at the top, and I'll just kind of give a high level. So this issue was opened 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, essentially basically creating around environment dashboards to view environments and deployment statuses. So this is a way for customers to look at how their deployments are working associated with it. And kind of just to highlight kind of the hindsight observation that we got feedback from the team on the dashboard itself was very large in hindsight. In particular, we should have pushed probably from a development perspective to have it broken down into much more smaller parts. The other part first of all, if you have any high-level thoughts on how to break down the dashboard, I'd be curious what your heuristic is, or if you have one. Maybe that's the first question to ask.
I would make something super ugly first, maybe behind a feature flag, but like just a list of all the environments, straight to text, nothing else. That would be iteration 1. And then iteration 2 could be that you hyperlink them so you can click them, and then go from there.
Okay, that's a good observation, because that'll actually help with the second problem they had, which was one of the things that they ended up doing was giving it some scope around it as far as the number of projects environments. Instead of focusing on the stylization of it or how it's viewed, and just doing it as lists, while those could be ugly and not look very good, you could actually have unlimited scope there, which would be a good example of getting feedback from customers. Is that kind of your thinking there from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I'm always thinking like, what's the smallest step? Like, so you want an environment dashboard? Okay, that's a list of environments. Let's start with a list of environments, and you can probably program that in an hour.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. That's a good feedback for the team in that regard, in terms of thinking about it from that perspective. Okay.
And I'm not sure it's this one, but I think what also happened here is that you were able to kind of, I don't know, add things to this dashboard it had a different, like we have projects and they're sorted by groups. But I think here you could select environments across many groups. That made it many times more complex because it didn't fit with anything. Stuff like that, we should really wait until we've shipped the first iteration and then see what customers ask for.
Yeah, I think that is one of the key aspects, was there was selectability associated with it in that regard. I remember seeing that as well.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the major things that totally should have been cut from the initial scope. Just show all environments in a project first, and then do it on a group, and something else should be separate from shipping this.
So 2 follow-on questions. How do you think that conversation should go between development and product in these cases? Say we feel like we're getting a large, what we feel is like a larger effort for an MVC, let's say. How do you think we should have that conversation to be incremental?
Yeah, so you see this is scheduled, and you think, hey, I might not be able to finish this in one release. So you go back to the project manager and say, hey, can you not schedule this for this milestone? Because I'm afraid I cannot do it. Please select something else. And then hopefully the product manager removes it from the milestone, adds something else, because we always have enough work. I've never heard of like, oh, project managers don't have any ideas of what to ship. And then you can take some time with the project manager over the 3 weeks to kind of have a call about it and try to fix it. So instead of trying to fix it like in a rush, just say, hey, this is not working. It gets unscheduled, and put something else that's smaller on the schedule, and work to reduce the scope. Now, that's not always possible. If we promise it to a customer, it's a different story or something else. But for this, no one was waiting for that. So we could have taken time to scope it down.
So that's a good observation, that deferring work till it's properly defined, and then spending the time to actually define it is a key aspect to an engineering manager's job.
Maybe we should be more explicit about this, because we always say product managers schedule engineers' time, which I think is super important to have. But I think we should say engineers can veto things. Engineers cannot put something in the sprint, but they can veto things because they're too large.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I'll have to go back and check how we word that in the handbook and see if there's an update we can do there around that. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about that, because that's a learning for me to think about as well.
You cannot select your own assignment, but you can decline any assignment. If you don't believe in it, don't accept it.
The other observation I had on this that's slightly different is this obviously was an issue that was created a long time ago. There was a gap of time where no one was working on it, and then we kind of came back to it. How do you think we should reevaluate when we pick up old work like this? Do you think we should assume a decision has been made, ask questions? What is your approach? Do you think in general we should think of in these terms?
Yeah, I don't think there's a certain process to it, but we learn things along the way, as in ship things that are smaller. Well, we continually relearn that lesson, but I don't think there's anything specifically to the age. With anything, it's important to do things because they're written down, but do things because you think they're a good idea, and if not, change what is written down. But I don't have any specific advice there.
Okay, all right, that's good to know as well. Thank you. I'm going to unshare my screen because the next few questions are kind of more unrelated to the issue at hand. So I just want to shift gears a little bit.
And I want to compliment you on the issues. Like, one was a perfect example of iteration, and one was one of the things where we went off the road in a very clear way. So thanks for that.
No problem. And I want to thank both of the members for having the courage both to show what's going well and what's not going well. Clement Ho and Darby Frey both helped contribute to giving me some examples. So appreciate that.
Thanks for that, and think very highly of both of them.
Cool. I want to change gears now a little bit. In a truly iterative environment, one of the things I've been thinking about is what has to work well for us to succeed. I'm extremely logistical in my mindset. So of course I'm thinking about all those things. Things I thought about is, obviously good customer feedback, reasonable release cycles, well-working pipeline of testing are all super important, particularly as we get our MR rates up to 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 MRs a month. But are there other things I should be thinking about in that regard, or the engineering or development staff at large should be thinking about in that regard?
I think it's all about cycle time. So if your cycle time is long, you will have to fit more work in there, because otherwise you're not going to get to the overall velocity you want. So it's just a function of cycle time. And cycle time is like, how many permissions do you need? If you need the database team to sign off, and the security team, and the user interface team, and the templating team, and the user management team, and the admin interface team, and the pajamas team that does our UX library, and the operational team, just saying some things that you could do. All those 8 teams need to sign off, plus a maintainer that's overburdened, that needs to review your code. Your cycle time is going to be long. So you'll have to fit more things in it. So it's so important to realize that for all those teams, we need to get from approvals to automated mitigation. Our database team, they're doing an awesome work, and they're understaffed. And they're now doing code reviews where they sign off on the code. We should go to something where your migration is just going to run on a copy of the production database, and if it doesn't migrate quickly, then you're gonna hear about it from that automation. Maintainers, if they're not available, then maybe we should accept things by default. That's not pretty, but it's better. Like, we should never slow people down, and we've taken a lot of care defining our categories and making sure that there's no overlap. We don't have a team for the administrative interface. We don't have a team for the project setup. There's a team that does projects, but you don't need their sign off. The pajamas team, like, if you want to add something to pajamas, you can just do that. You don't have to wait for their approval. Their mission is to kind of continually refactor the UX library and make it better, not to kind of approve any additions to it. So our mission is everyone can contribute. That needs to go as fast as possible. People should be allowed to change things. And a database team, a UX library team, they should kind of see everything that's getting changed. And then when there's a mistake being made, they should reach out. But you shouldn't have to wait for approval. Waiting for approval slows down cycle time and is incompatible with iteration.
That's also a great observation. One of the things that I know that we debate quite frequently internally is how to structure teams such that we don't have bottlenecks in the organization. So it's really important that we continue that. And I want to make sure that if anybody sees that happening, they talk to our leaders as quickly as possible about it, because those are the types of things that we need to remove as quickly as possible.
You don't want a dependency on another team. That is super bad.
Cool. I have a few more questions, just if you have a little bit more time. One is kind of the counter to this. Are there any situations where you wouldn't want us to be aware of? I can't think of any, but I'd be curious if you had thought of any cases that, gosh, this is the time when we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, so there's things that are kind of a one-way door, and things that come to my mind is, for example, a reorganization. If we're going to reorganize the company, you don't want, look, on Monday, we're moving these two people. On Tuesday, we're moving these two people as well. Like, you're laughing because you know that that's going to create a whole, you want to be clear. On Monday, you want to say, this is how the new org is going to look like. So everyone's on, there's no confusion about it, and people don't have to guess. Another thing would be a pricing change. You can't go to your customers and, yeah, we're going to raise the price by 2%. And 2 days later, oh, we're going to raise the price by 2% in addition. And like, first of all, we're not saying we're raising prices, but like it's a one-way door. You have to be clear about what you're going to do. So there's some things that don't lend themselves to iteration. I think 95% of things do lend themselves. And I think it's what we maybe not use enough is just saying, hey, this is early. This is alpha or beta. For example, if you just give an ugly list of the environments, you could put at the top, like, this is an alpha feature. It's going to be ugly. We don't expect anything else, but we still ship it. And it's still useful for the people who need that environment list. And we can build on that.
Cool. That's great for you to share. That's important for us to remember, is we do have one-way doors sometimes that we have to recognize. A last question. Is there any question I should have asked that you wish I had asked?
Maybe I'll detail where iteration came from. So when we were in Y Combinator, we were in a peer group, and every 2 weeks we had to sit down and say what we achieved over the last 2 weeks and what we were going to do. And the second time we had that meeting, the first time we had to kind of report on what we did. We did way less than everyone around us. And Dimitri and I drove home, and we were like, we got to up our game. So we told, like, we got to go faster. And we took our 3-month plan, and we tried to do as much of it in the next 2 weeks. And obviously we could do only like 10 or 20% of the effort, but we learned so much, and we got so much of the result. I think we got 50% of the result of that 3-month plan in 2 weeks, which is amazing. And we discovered that we unlocked something, and it's only possible because we accept kind of a low level of shame with what we ship. We know it's not the best. We know that environment list looks ugly, but we also know that it's so essential to iterate and get that feedback early and not have to coordinate as much with other people in the company. And that's how we operate. And it brings amazing benefits in staying productive as you scale as a company.
That's a great story. I want to really thank you for your time, Sid, and thank you for sharing that. That really helps a lot. And thank you also for your time for the interview today. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for organizing. My pleasure.